The metal walls of the holding cell gleamed under harsh white lights that never dimmed. Park Hana sat perfectly still on the cold floor, her back straight against the smooth surface behind her. She had been counting the cycles of the ventilation system for 3 days now. Every 47 seconds, a soft hiss of recycled air entered through vents she could not see. The aliens who had captured her thought they were clever, but they had made their first mistake by giving her time to think. Dr. Cale Vorthak studied the readings on his tablet as he walked down the corridor toward the specimen's cell. The human creature had been surprisingly calm since her capture near the edge of what these primitives called their solar system. Most species showed signs of panic, aggression, or despair when brought aboard a coalition research vessel. This one simply sat and waited. It was almost as if she understood that resistance would be pointless at this stage. The Vorthan scientist was tall and thin like all his kind, with pale blue skin that seemed to glow slightly under the ship's lighting. His large black eyes held no emotion as he approached the observation window. Inside the cell, the human female remained motionless. Her brown hair was tied back in a simple style, and her dark uniform bore symbols that his computer had identified as military markings. The initial scans suggested she was approximately 34 Earth years old, which his research indicated was the prime of life for her species. Hana kept her breathing steady as she sensed movement outside her cell. Through her peripheral vision, she could see a tall figure observing her through what was probably one-way glass. She had learned long ago in her military training that information was the most valuable weapon in any situation. These aliens had captured her, but they had also given her an opportunity to study them. Every detail she gathered might be useful later. The cell door opened with a smooth, sliding motion that made no sound. Dr. Vorthak entered, followed by 2 guards carrying energy weapons that hummed with barely contained power. The guards were different from the doctor, shorter, broader, with darker skin and additional arms that ended in what looked like natural weapons. Hana filed this information away. Multiple species working together meant a larger organization than just raiders or pirates. Specimen designation, Human Terra 001. Dr. Vorthak spoke in accented but clear English. You will stand and follow for initial assessment. Hana rose smoothly to her feet, noting how the guards tensed slightly at her movement. Interesting. They were nervous about her despite having obvious advantages in numbers, weapons, and technology. She followed the doctor out of the cell, walking between the 2 guards who maintained careful distance from her. The corridor outside was wide and curved, suggesting they were on a large ship. The walls were made of the same smooth metal as her cell, with patterns of light running along them that seemed to pulse in rhythm with the ship's systems. Other doors lined the hallway, and Hana wondered how many other specimens were being held here. The thought made her jaw tighten, but she kept her expression neutral. They entered a large chamber filled with equipment that looked both advanced and strangely organic. Curved surfaces blended with angular machinery, and displays showed readings in symbols she did not recognize. In the center of the room was a chair that looked designed for restraint rather than comfort. Dr. Vorthak gestured for her to sit. The initial tests will measure your physical capabilities, he explained as the guards positioned themselves near the exits. Cooperation will result in more comfortable conditions. Resistance will be dealt with appropriately. Hana sat in the chair and allowed the restraints to close around her wrists and ankles. The metal was warm against her skin and seemed to adjust automatically to fit her exactly. More advanced technology than anything Earth had developed. She tested the restraints subtly and found them completely secure. For now, cooperation was indeed the better choice. Dr. Vorthak activated several machines around the room. Beams of colored light passed over Hana's body while displays showed rapidly changing data. She could feel slight tingling sensations as the scanners did their work. The doctor studied the results with obvious interest, occasionally making notes on his tablet. Remarkable, he said, apparently to himself rather than to her. The bone density is much higher than expected for a species that evolved in your gravity conditions. Muscle fiber composition suggests both endurance and explosive strength capabilities. The scans continued for nearly an hour. Dr. Vorthak tested her reflexes, her vision under different light conditions, and her response to various sounds and frequencies. Through it all, Hana remained calm and observant. She noticed that the doctor's tablet had a visible screen that she could read from. Her position. The symbols were alien, but numbers appeared to be similar enough to Earth mathematics that she could begin to understand the basic measurements. When the physical scans were complete, Dr. Vorthak moved to a different set of equipment. "Now we will test cognitive function," he announced. "You will be presented with problems to solve. Your performance will determine the scope of future experiments." A holographic display appeared in front of Hana, showing a three-dimensional maze. A small light marked the starting position, and another marked the goal. Dr. Vorthak explained that she needed to find the path from start to finish while avoiding certain colored areas that would reset her progress. Hana studied the maze carefully. It was complex, with multiple levels and what appeared to be moving obstacles. She began to trace possible paths with her eyes, considering options and alternatives. The doctor watched her closely, timing her response and noting her approach to the problem. After 2 minutes of observation, Hana began to call out directions. "Forward 3, up 1 level, right 2, down 1 level, forward 4, left 1, up 2 levels. She continued until she had traced a complete path to the goal. Dr. Vorthak checked her solution against his computer and looked surprised at the result. "Incorrect," he said, but his tone suggested confusion rather than disappointment. "You have found a path, but it is not the optimal solution we programmed." "You asked me to find a path from start to finish," Hana replied calmly. "You did not specify that it needed to be the shortest path. My solution avoids all the colored areas and reaches the goal in fewer moves than the route your computer calculated." Dr. Vorthak stared at her for a long moment before checking his calculations again. The human was correct. Her path was actually more efficient than the one his advanced computer had determined. This was not supposed to be possible for a primitive species. The tests continued for several more hours. Problem-solving exercises, memory challenges, pattern recognition tasks. In each case, Hana performed at or above the level Dr. Vorthak had expected from much more advanced species. More troubling was her approach to the problems. She did not simply follow logical steps like most species would. Instead, she seemed to find creative solutions that bypass the intended difficulty entirely. When the session finally ended, Dr. Vorthak was deeply troubled. He had expected to find a primitive creature with basic intelligence suitable for simple tasks. Instead, he had discovered a mind that approached problems in ways his own advanced science could not predict or model. This human was thinking in patterns that did not match any species in the Coalition database. As the guards escorted Hana back to her cell, she reflected on what she had learned. The aliens were clearly more advanced than humanity in technology and probably had superior physical capabilities. But they thought in rigid patterns that followed predictable logic. They expected her to behave like their computer models suggested she should. That expectation was going to be their weakness. Dr. Vorthak remained in his laboratory long after the specimen had been returned to containment. He reviewed the test results again and again, trying to understand what he had witnessed. According to every model the Coalition had developed, primitive species should be simple to understand and control. This human had demonstrated capabilities that challenged those fundamental assumptions. He made a note in his research log. Subject Human Terra 001 requires expanded testing protocols. Initial assessment suggests cognitive abilities may exceed preliminary projections. Recommend increased security measures and careful monitoring of all interactions. In her cell, Hana continued counting ventilation cycles and planning. The aliens thought they were studying her, but she was studying them, too. Every test they gave her was an opportunity to learn more about their technology, their psychology, and their weaknesses. They had made a critical error in assuming she was just a primitive specimen. She was a soldier, and soldiers always looked for ways to turn any situation to their advantage. The war between their species had already begun, even if only one side knew it yet. 3 months had passed since the human specimen had been brought aboard the ethereal Dominion, and Dr. Cale Vorthak was beginning to question everything he thought he knew about primitive species development. The daily tests had produced results that defied every model in the Coalition database. Where other captured species showed decline in performance due to stress and captivity, this human female was actually improving. Park Hana completed her morning exercise routine in the small space of her cell. Push-ups, squats, stretches, and mental exercises to keep her mind sharp. The aliens had increased her food rations after the first month when their scans showed she was losing muscle mass. They wanted to study her at peak condition, which suited her perfectly. Every calorie they gave her was fuel for her preparation. The cell door opened at exactly the same time it had for the past 93 days. Hana had memorized every detail of the routine, from the timing of guard shifts to the patterns of questions Dr. Vorthak asked during tests. Predictability was another weakness she filed away for future use. Today brought a new face along with the familiar doctor. Admiral Thex Mortain was clearly a high-ranking officer based on the elaborate uniform and the way the guards stood straighter in his presence. He was taller than Dr. Vorthak, with the same pale blue skin but additional markings around his eyes. That suggested either age or rank. Possibly both. Admiral, Dr. Vorthak said as they walked toward the testing chamber. The specimen continues to exceed projections in every category. Cardiovascular efficiency has improved 23%. Reaction times have decreased despite ongoing stress factors. Most significantly, she appears to be learning our language and technological principles at an unprecedented rate. Admiral Mortain studied Hana as she walked between them. How is that possible? Our initial assessment indicated limited cognitive capacity typical of pre-space flight species. That assessment may have been incomplete, Dr. Vorthak admitted reluctantly. This specimen demonstrates adaptive learning patterns that suggest a different type of intelligence than we typically encounter. In the testing chamber, new equipment had been installed. Hana recognized some elements from previous sessions, but there were additions that looked more sophisticated and potentially dangerous. The familiar restraint chair had been replaced with a platform surrounded by holographic projectors and what appeared to be physical obstacles. Today, we will test combat adaptation, Dr. Vorthak explained as technicians made final adjustments to the equipment. You will face automated opponents in a controlled environment. Your performance will help us understand human tactical capabilities under stress. Admiral Morton took position behind the observation window while guards activated energy barriers around the testing area. Hana found herself standing in the center of a holographic arena that looked like a simplified battlefield. Cover positions were marked by solid light constructs, and weapon stations held energy rifles similar to what the guards carried. The simulation will begin in 30 seconds, an automated voice announced. Objectives will be displayed as the scenario progresses. Hana moved immediately toward the nearest weapon station, testing the weight and balance of the energy rifle. It was lighter than human weapons, but the basic principles seemed similar. Point, aim, fire. The power cell attachment was obvious, and she could see a simple safety mechanism near the trigger, not too different from Earth technology, just more advanced. 3 automated drones materialized in the arena as the simulation began. They moved with mechanical precision, following programmed attack patterns that prioritized efficiency over creativity. Hana smiled grimly as she dove behind the nearest cover position. Predictable opponents were almost too easy. The first drone advanced in a straight line, firing energy bolts at regular intervals. Hana waited until it reached the optimal position, then rolled out from cover and fired 3 quick shots. The first 2 missed intentionally, causing the drone to adjust its position exactly where she wanted it. The third shot disabled its primary weapon system. Dr. Vorthak watched with growing amazement as the human specimen systematically dismantled each automated opponent. She was not simply reacting to their attacks. She was predicting their movements and manipulating them into vulnerable positions. The drones were programmed with combat algorithms that had been tested against hundreds of species. None had performed at this level. Impossible, Admiral Morton breathed as Hana used the disabled first drone as a shield while engaging the remaining 2. Those drones are programmed with elite guard combat protocols. They should be able to defeat any primitive species easily. The second drone attempted to flank her position, but Hana had already anticipated the maneuver. She threw her energy rifle to her left hand while drawing a metal rod from the weapon station with her right. When the drone rounded the corner expecting to find her weapon pointed the wrong direction, it instead encountered the metal rod swinging at precisely the right angle to damage its sensor array. She is using their own programming against them, Dr. Vorthak realized. She has identified the patterns in their behavior and is exploiting the predictability. The third drone tried a different approach, hovering above the arena and firing down at her position. Hana responded by climbing onto the damaged first drone and using its remaining systems to boost herself up to the hovering unit's level. Before, the automated opponent could adjust to this unexpected tactic. She had disabled its flight system with the metal rod and sent it crashing to the arena floor. Total time elapsed, 4 minutes and 37 seconds. Dr. Vorthak checked the recordings 3 times to make sure the sensors had captured everything correctly. According to the computer analysis, the human had demonstrated tactical thinking that surpassed their own elite guard units. This was supposed to be impossible. End simulation, Admiral Mortain ordered, his voice tight with concern. As the holographic arena faded away, Hana calmly returned the weapons to their stations and walked back to her starting position. She was breathing slightly harder from the physical exertion, but otherwise appeared completely calm. When she looked up at the observation window, she smiled directly at Admiral Mortain. Specimen designation, Human Terra 001, Dr. Vorthak called, out, trying to maintain his professional composure. How did you determine the drone's behavioral patterns so quickly? You built them to be efficient, Hana replied simply. Efficiency requires predictable patterns. Humans learn to fight unpredictable opponents. We had to, or we would not have survived on our world. Admiral Mortain felt a chill run through him at those words. The human spoke of survival as if it were a constant struggle rather than the normal state of existence. What kind of world produced creatures that expected combat to be unpredictable and chaotic? Doctor, the Admiral said quietly, I want a complete review of your research protocols. If this specimen is representative of her species, we may need to reconsider our approach to the human system. Dr. Vorthak nodded, but privately he was already reaching a more disturbing conclusion. Over the past 3 months, he had watched this human adapt to every test, learn from every challenge, and improve her performance despite the stress of captivity. She was not just surviving their experiments, she was using them as training exercises. Admiral, he said carefully, I recommend we increase security protocols immediately. I believe the specimen may be more dangerous than our initial assessments indicated. As the guards escorted Hana back to her cell, she reflected on the combat test with satisfaction. She had learned several important things about Vorthan technology and military doctrine. Their automated systems were sophisticated but rigid. Their weapons were powerful but designed for efficient rather than adaptive use. Most importantly, they clearly expected other species to think and fight the way they did. In her cell, Hana resumed her exercise routine with slight modifications based on what she had learned about Vorthan energy weapons. The weight distribution was different from human firearms, and the recoil patterns followed different physics. She would need to adjust her muscle memory accordingly. Dr. Vorthak spent the rest of the day reviewing test results and comparing them to data from other species. In the Coalition database, every comparison led to the same unsettling conclusion. Humans appeared to possess a type of adaptive intelligence that other species lacked. Where most creatures learned fixed responses to specific stimuli, humans seemed capable of learning the underlying principles and applying them to entirely new situations. Admiral Mortain called an emergency meeting with his senior staff to discuss the implications of the day's test results. The combat simulation had been designed to measure basic tactical capabilities in primitive species. Instead, it had revealed something that challenged fundamental assumptions about intelligence and adaptation. If one human can perform at this level, the Admiral said to his assembled officers, what would an entire military force be capable of? Our projections for conquering the human system assumed we would be facing a predictable opponent with limited tactical flexibility. The meeting lasted well into the ship's night cycle, but no satisfactory answers emerged. Captain Lee Do-yun adjusted the passive sensors for the 100th time as his stealth ship drifted silently through space, maintaining perfect distance from the alien research vessel. 2 months of careful tracking had taught him the patrol patterns and scanning frequencies of the Vorthan fleet. The ethereal Dominion followed predictable routes through hyperspace, making it relatively easy to shadow despite their superior technology. Any change in their status? Asked Sergeant Kim Mina from the weapons station. She had volunteered for this mission the moment they confirmed that Lieutenant Commander Park Hana was being held aboard the alien ship. The three of them had served together for 6 years, and leaving a teammate in enemy hands was not acceptable to any of them. Still maintaining standard research protocols, Lee replied, studying the energy readings from the alien vessel. Regular scans, controlled environment maintenance, and what appears to be daily testing sessions. She is still alive and apparently healthy based on the medical scanner frequencies they are using. Aboard the Ethereal Dominion, Dr. Cale Vorthak was discovering that his human specimen had become something of an obsession. 5 months of daily testing had produced a comprehensive database of human capabilities that defied every prediction his science had made. The creature continued to adapt and improve despite the psychological stress that should have broken any primitive mind weeks ago. The subject has demonstrated mastery of 17 different problem-solving methodologies, he reported to Admiral Thex Mortain during their weekly briefing. She approaches each new challenge with techniques that appear to be improvised in real time, yet follow underlying principles that suggest extensive prior training in adaptive thinking. Admiral Mortain studied the data charts with growing unease. Doctor, these results indicate capabilities that exceed those of our own tactical specialists. How is this possible from a species that has not even achieved faster-than-light travel? I believe we may have fundamentally misunderstood the nature of human intelligence, Dr. Vorthak admitted reluctantly. Our models assume that advanced thinking requires advanced technology and stable civilization. Humans appear to have developed their cognitive abilities through constant environmental pressure and conflict, rather than through technological advancement. In her cell, Hana completed another set of mental exercises designed to keep her memory sharp and her planning abilities focused. She had been building a detailed map of the ship's layout based on the routes she was taken during testing sessions. Guard rotations, security protocols, system access points, and weapon storage locations were all cataloged in her mind with military precision. The alien computer systems interested her most. During the past month of testing, she had been able to observe several technicians operating the equipment that monitored her performance. The interfaces were surprisingly intuitive once she understood the basic symbol meanings. More importantly, she had identified several security weaknesses that could be exploited if the opportunity arose. Dr. Yex Corthane, the ship's security chief, had been conducting his own investigation into anomalous system behaviors that seemed to coincide with the human testing periods. Minor power fluctuations, sensor calibration errors, and communication delays had increased in frequency over the past few weeks. The incidents were small enough to be explained as normal system wear, but the pattern troubled him. I want additional monitoring on all systems during human testing periods, he ordered his technical staff. If the specimen is somehow interfering with our equipment, I need to know how she is doing it. The next testing session brought a new type of challenge that Dr. Vorthak hoped would provide insight into human problem-solving under extreme stress. Hana found herself in a maze-like environment with multiple levels, moving obstacles, and what appeared to be time pressure elements. The objective was to reach a specific location while avoiding automated security systems. You have 30 minutes to complete the course, Dr. Vorthak announced. Failure to reach the objective within the time limit will result in increasingly uncomfortable environmental conditions. Hana studied the layout quickly, noting the positions of security scanners, motion detectors, and energy barriers. The course was designed to test stealth and infiltration abilities, but it also provided her with detailed information about Vorthan's security technology. Every sensor she observed was a potential weakness she could exploit later. Moving through the course with careful precision, she tested the detection ranges and response patterns of each security device. When a motion sensor detected her presence, she noted exactly how long it took to trigger an alarm and what type of countermeasures activated. When an energy barrier blocked her path, she studied its power source and control mechanisms. Dr. Corthine watched the security feeds with intense focus as the human specimen navigated his carefully designed infiltration course. She was not simply trying to complete the objective as quickly as possible. Instead, she appeared to be conducting a systematic analysis of every security system she encountered. She is studying our defenses, he realized with growing alarm. This is not a test. Subject trying to solve a puzzle. This is a military specialist gathering intelligence on our security capabilities. Admiral Mortain arrived at the observation deck just as Hana reached the final section of the course. She had completed 90% of the challenge with 12 minutes remaining. But instead of rushing to finish, she was examining the last set of security barriers with methodical precision. "Why is she not completing the objective?" the Admiral asked. "She clearly has sufficient time remaining." "Because she is not trying to pass our test," Dr. Corthane replied grimly. "She is conducting reconnaissance on our ship's security systems. We are not studying her. She is studying us." With 2 minutes remaining before the time limit, Hana suddenly moved through the final barriers with swift efficiency that demonstrated complete understanding of their operational parameters. She reached the objective with 17 seconds to spare, but her smile suggested satisfaction with something other than simply completing the course. During the transfer back to her cell, Hana made her move. The route passed through a section of corridor that she had identified as having minimal sensor coverage due to a maintenance panel that slightly blocked one scanner's field of view. As the guards paused to verify her cell assignment on their tablets, she slipped the metal stylus she had palmed from the testing equipment into the maintenance panel. The access was brief, lasting only 4 seconds before she had to return to her position between the guards. But it was enough time to connect the stylus to the ship's communication array and transmit a brief mathematical sequence toward the coordinates where she calculated Earth's patrol ships might be searching for. Her Captain Lee's passive sensors detected the transmission immediately. The signal was weak and lasted only a few seconds, but it was clearly human in origin and contained mathematical sequences that could only have come from someone with Earth Defense Force training. "Mina, we have contact," he announced, downloading the signal for analysis. "Hana is alive and she just sent us a message." Sergeant Kim Mina felt relief flood through her as she decoded the transmission. "It is not just a distress signal," she said with growing excitement. "She has included tactical data about their ship systems, security weaknesses, and guard rotation patterns. She has been gathering intelligence this entire time." The mathematical sequences painted a detailed picture of Vorthon capabilities and vulnerabilities that would have taken months of external observation to discover. Hana had provided them with shield frequencies, weapon power signatures, engine specifications, and most importantly, the exact locations of critical system nodes that could be targeted to disable the ship without destroying it. "She wants us to board the ship," Lee realized as he studied the data. "This is not a rescue request. This is an assault plan." Dr. Corthane's security sweep detected the unauthorized transmission within hours, but by then it was too late to prevent its reception by whoever had been waiting to receive it. "The human has contacted her own kind," he reported to Admiral Mortain with barely controlled anger. "We have been compromised." "How is that possible?" the Admiral demanded. "She has been under constant surveillance with no access to our communication systems." "She gained access during transport between testing sessions," Dr. Corthane explained, displaying the security recordings. "The transmission was brief, but it contained detailed information about our ship's capabilities and defensive systems." Admiral Morton studied the recordings with growing dread. The human had planned and executed an intelligence-gathering operation while pretending to be a helpless test subject. For months, she had been learning their weaknesses while they thought they were studying hers. "Doctor," he said to Dr. Vorthak, "how long would it take for a human rescue force to reach our position?" "Based on their primitive propulsion technology, several weeks at minimum," Dr. Vorthak replied. "We have time to relocate to a more secure system if necessary." But Admiral Mortain was beginning to understand that they had severely underestimated human capabilities. If one captured specimen could gather this much intelligence while under constant supervision, what could an organized human military force accomplish? The stealth infiltration of the ethereal dominion required precise timing and flawless execution of the assault plan that Park Hana had transmitted. Captain Lee Do-yoon and Sergeant Kim Mina spent 3 days studying every detail of the intelligence data, memorizing ship layouts and security protocols until they could navigate the alien vessel with their eyes closed. The docking bay she identified has a 6-minute gap in sensor coverage during each guard rotation, Lee explained as they made final preparations for the boarding operation. "We will have that window to get inside and reach the first checkpoint before alarms can be triggered." Kim Mina checked her weapons and equipment one final time. The alien energy signatures Hana had provided would allow them to modify their gear to avoid detection by Vorthon scanners. "Once we are inside, the maintenance tunnels will get us to her cell level without encountering the main security checkpoints," What they discovered after successful infiltration was far more disturbing than either of them had expected. The ethereal Dominion was not simply a research vessel studying one human prisoner. It was the command ship for an entire intelligence-gathering fleet that had been systematically cataloging the weaknesses of dozens of species throughout the galaxy. "Look at this," Kim whispered as they accessed a data terminal in an empty corridor. "They have detailed files on every inhabited system within 50 light-years of Earth. Military capabilities, resource inventories, population centers, technological assessments." Lee studied the alien text scrolling across the screen using the translation protocols that Hana had included in her transmission. "This is not random exploration. This is preparation for systematic conquest. Earth is just one target on a very long list." Meanwhile, Admiral Park Jin-ho received the preliminary intelligence report from his son's infiltration mission with growing alarm. The scope of the Vorthan operation was far beyond anything Earth Defense Command had anticipated. The enemy possessed not just superior technology, but detailed knowledge of human capabilities gathered through months of studying Hana. According to this data, they have been preparing for invasion of the human system for over a year, he reported to the emergency session of Earth Defense Council. "Our defensive capabilities, fleet positions, and military doctrine have all been analyzed and cataloged by their intelligence operation." Aboard the research vessel, Dr. Kyle Vorthak was conducting what he believed would be his final experiment with the human specimen. The security breach had convinced Admiral Mortain that continued testing was too dangerous, but the doctor had convinced him to allow one last session that might provide crucial insight into human psychology. "Today, we will test your species. Response to impossible situations," he announced as Hana was brought into a testing chamber that had been completely reconfigured. "You will face a scenario designed to break your will to resist through demonstration of futility." The chamber contained what appeared to be a perfect replica of a human dwelling, complete with furniture, personal items, and even photographs that the ship's computers had generated based on psychological profiles. In the center of the room sat a small human child, obviously artificial but remarkably realistic in appearance. "The scenario is simple," Dr. Vorthak explained. "You must choose between saving this representation of human innocence or preserving your own life. The child is programmed to respond as a real human would, with fear, pain, and desperation that will increase over time if you do not act." Hana studied the artificial child carefully, noting the sophisticated construction and the subtle movements that indicated advanced robotics rather than biological life. The aliens had created an impressive simulation, but they had made a critical error in assuming she would react emotionally rather than analytically. "What happens if I refuse to participate in your scenario?" she asked calmly. "Then the child's suffering will continue indefinitely while you remain safely restrained," Dr. Vorthak replied. "We will observe whether humans can maintain emotional detachment when confronted with the suffering of their own kind." "And what happens if I do participate?" "The scenario will escalate until you reach your psychological breaking point. We will measure the exact parameters of human emotional limits under extreme stress." Hana nodded thoughtfully and then did something that Dr. Vorthak had not anticipated. Instead of showing distress at the child's simulated fear, she walked calmly over to the artificial being and began examining its construction with professional interest. "Fascinating work," she said, lifting the child's arm to study the joint mechanisms. "The skin texture is remarkably realistic, and the facial expressions show sophisticated programming. Your robotics technology is quite advanced." Dr. Vorthak stared in shock as the human specimen treated his carefully designed psychological weapon as nothing more than an interesting piece of machinery. "You are supposed to be emotionally affected by the child's suffering," he said, his voice showing the first signs of desperation they had ever heard from him. "I am a soldier," Hana replied simply. "Soldiers learn to distinguish between real threats and artificial ones. This is a machine designed to manipulate my emotions. Why would I allow myself to be manipulated by a machine?" The realization hit Dr. Vorthak like a physical blow. For months, he had been trying to understand human psychology using Vorthan assumptions about emotional responses and logical behavior. But humans had developed their minds through constant exposure to deception, manipulation, and survival challenges that required them to see through artificial threats. "Doctor," Admiral Mortaine's voice came over the communication system. "We have detected unauthorized personnel aboard the ship. It appears the human specimen's message was more than just intelligence gathering. It was a coordination signal for a rescue operation. In the maintenance tunnels, Lee and Kim moved through the ship with practiced efficiency, using Hana's detailed intelligence to avoid patrols and security systems. The alien crew was responding to alerts and conducting searches. But they were looking for intruders who would behave like other species they had encountered. They are checking obvious hiding places and following predictable search patterns," Kim observed as a patrol passed within meters of their position without detecting them. Hana was right about their tactical thinking being too rigid. Lee accessed another data terminal to confirm their route to the detention level. "According to the ship's internal systems, she is being held in testing chamber 7 rather than her usual cell. We need to adjust our approach." The testing chamber alarms began sounding as Dr. Vorthak finally understood the true scope of his failure. The human specimen had not been broken by months of psychological testing. Instead, she had been systematically studying Vorthan psychology, technology, and military doctrine while pretending to be helpless. "You have been gathering intelligence this entire time," he said, his voice filled with a mixture of admiration and horror. "Every test, every conversation, every moment of apparent cooperation was actually reconnaissance." "You wanted to understand how humans think," Hana replied as she heard familiar footsteps approaching the chamber. "Now you know. We think about survival, adaptation, and how to turn every disadvantage into an advantage." The chamber door exploded inward as Lee and Kim breached the testing room using shaped charges they had constructed from alien materials found throughout the ship. Dr. Vorthak dove for cover as energy weapons fire filled the air, but the human rescue team moved with coordination that his computer models had never predicted. "Time to go," Lee announced as he tossed Hana a weapon while Kim covered their exit route. "We have maybe 3 minutes before they seal the entire section." But Hana had one final task to complete before leaving. She accessed the testing chamber's main computer and began downloading the complete database of Vorthon research on human capabilities. If the aliens wanted to study her species, then humanity deserved to know exactly what conclusions they had reached. "What are you doing?" Kim demanded as alarm sirens echoed through the corridors. "Getting our property back," Hana replied, transferring terabytes of alien intelligence data to the portable storage device Lee had brought. "They have spent months learning about us. Now we get to learn about them." The escape from the ethereal dominion was a masterpiece of human tactical thinking applied to alien technology. Using the ship's own systems against it, the rescue team disabled critical components while avoiding major confrontations with security forces. By the time Admiral Mortaine realized what was happening, the humans had already reached their stealth ship and were preparing to depart. Dr. Vorthak watched from the observation deck as the small human vessel disappeared into hyperspace, carrying with it not just their escaped specimen, but also a complete copy of every piece of research the Coalition had conducted on human capabilities. Months of careful scientific study had been turned against them by the very intelligence they had been trying to understand. "They were never the subjects of our experiments," he said quietly to Admiral Mortaine as damage reports flooded in from throughout the ship. "We were the subjects of theirs." Admiral Mortaine stood in silence as he considered the implications of what had just occurred. A single human had infiltrated their most secure research facility. 6 months after the rescue from the ethereal dominion, Earth had transformed from an isolated world into the center of the most effective resistance movement the galaxy had ever seen. Fleet Admiral Ko Sun-hee stood on the bridge of the flagship, indomitable, watching as human vessels moved in perfect coordination with ships from a dozen other species who had joined the fight against Vorthon oppression. The intelligence that Park Hana had gathered during her captivity had proven more valuable than anyone could have imagined. Not only did it provide detailed technical specifications of Coalition technology, but it also revealed the psychological weaknesses that made the Vorthon Empire vulnerable to the type of asymmetric warfare that humans had perfected over millennia. "Admiral," reported Captain Lee Do-hyun from the tactical station, "the strike force is in position around the Coalition supply depot. All teams report ready for synchronized assault." Admiral Ko studied the holographic display showing the positions of human ships around the massive alien facility. The attack plan looked chaotic to anyone trained in conventional military doctrine, but that apparent chaos was actually a carefully orchestrated strategy that would hit the enemy from directions they could not predict or counter. Execute operation. Adaptation, she ordered. The human ships moved like a school of fish responding to a predator, each vessel following individual tactics while maintaining overall coordination through rapid communication and shared objectives. Vorthan defense systems, designed to counter predictable attack patterns, found themselves overwhelmed by opponents who seemed to change strategy every few seconds. Aboard the Coalition command ship defending the depot, Admiral Thex Mortain watched, in growing despair as his carefully planned defensive positions were systematically dismantled by human forces that refused to behave according to any known tactical doctrine. "How are they coordinating without central command structure?" demanded his tactical officer. "Our sensors detect no unified communication network, yet they respond to changing conditions as if controlled by a single mind." "Because they are not controlled," Admiral Mortain replied grimly. "They are adapted. Each ship commander makes independent decisions based on shared training and common objectives. They do not need central control because they think alike without being told what to think." The battle lasted only 43 minutes before the Coalition forces requested terms for surrender. Human casualties were minimal, while alien losses included most of their supply reserves and several of their most advanced warships. More importantly, the depot contained detailed files on Coalition operations throughout the galaxy. Dr. Kale Vorthak, now serving as a reluctant consultant to Coalition Command, reviewed the battle reports with scientific fascination despite his personal involvement in the disaster. "The humans have weaponized their unpredictability," he reported to the emergency session of Coalition leadership. "They do not follow standard military doctrine because standard doctrine assumes predictable enemy responses." "How do we counter an enemy that cannot be predicted?" asked Coalition Supreme Commander Vex Mortain, Admiral Mortain's superior and the architect of the original expansion plan. "We do not," Dr. Vorthak replied simply. "Our entire military philosophy is based on superior technology and logical tactical thinking. Humans possess neither advantage, but they have something we do not understand: the ability to adapt faster than we can respond." On Earth, Lieutenant Commander Park Hana addressed the joint session of the Defense Council and the newly formed Galactic Liberation Alliance. Representatives from 17 different species who had suffered under Coalition rule listened as she explained the strategic principles that were turning the tide of the war. "The Coalition assumes that advanced technology creates superior military capability," she said, displaying captured alien data on the holographic projectors. "But technology only provides advantages when both sides follow the same rules of engagement. Humans learned long ago that survival sometimes requires breaking the rules." The presentation included detailed analysis of how human military doctrine had evolved through thousands of years of warfare against opponents with different capabilities, resources, and strategic thinking. Unlike the Coalition species, who had developed their tactics through conquest of predictable enemies, humans had been forced to innovate constantly to survive against each other. "Every human conflict taught us something new about adaptation, deception, and the importance of thinking differently than our enemies expected," Hana continued. "The Coalition studied us as if we were a standard species that would respond to standard stimuli. They never considered that we might study them back." Sergeant Kim Mina, now promoted to Major and serving as Director of Intelligence Operations, presented the tactical assessments that had emerged from 6 months of conflict with Coalition forces. "Their command structure is hierarchical and relies on predictable information flow," she explained. "Disrupt their communication networks and their entire military response becomes confused and ineffective." The strategy sessions continued for days as human military leaders shared their knowledge with representatives from other resistant species. The galaxy was learning that technological superiority was not the only path to military success. Sometimes, the ability to think creatively was more valuable than the most advanced weapons. Dr. Vorthak found himself in an unprecedented position as Coalition Command requested his expertise in developing countermeasures to human tactical thinking. "You want me to predict the unpredictable," he said during one particularly frustrating planning session. "That is a logical impossibility." "Then what do you recommend?" asked Supreme Commander Vex Mortain. "Negotiation," Dr. Vorthak replied without hesitation. "The humans have demonstrated that they can learn and adapt faster than we can develop responses. Continuing this conflict will only result in further losses and the eventual spread of human tactical thinking to other species." The suggestion was met with outraged protests from coalition military leaders who could not accept the idea of negotiating with primitive species. But as the weeks passed and human victories continued to mount, even the most stubborn commanders began to realize that traditional conquest was no longer possible. Supreme Commander Vex Mortain made the decision that would reshape galactic politics for generations to come. "Open communication channels with the human leadership," he ordered. "We will discuss terms for coexistence rather than conquest." The negotiations took place aboard a neutral space station with representatives from all major galactic civilizations present as observers. Fleet Admiral Ko Sun-hee led the human delegation, while Supreme Commander Vex Mortain represented the coalition. The talks lasted for 3 weeks and covered every aspect of interstellar relations from trade agreements to territorial boundaries. "The coalition offers full membership in our organization," Supreme Commander Vex Mortain announced during the final session. "Earth will be granted equal status with all member worlds and full access to coalition technology and resources. We appreciate the offer," Admiral Ko replied, "but we have a counter-proposal. The coalition will be dissolved and replaced with a new organization based on equality and voluntary participation rather than conquest and hierarchy." The audacity of the suggestion stunned the alien delegates. Humans were demanding not just equality, but fundamental changes to the political structure that had governed the galaxy for over 1,000 years. "That is impossible," Supreme Commander Vex Mortain protested. "The coalition represents the natural order of advanced species governing primitive ones. The coalition represents the assumptions of species who never had to fight for survival." Lieutenant Commander Park Hana interjected from her position as special advisor to the human delegation. "You built your civilization on the belief that superior technology makes you superior beings. We are here to demonstrate that adaptation and creativity are more valuable than advanced weapons." Dr. Vorthak, serving as scientific advisor to the coalition delegation, surprised everyone by supporting the human position. "The research data supports their argument," he said quietly. "Human capabilities exceed our projections in every category that matters for long-term survival and development. They represent an evolutionary advantage that our species lacks." The final agreement established the Galactic Cooperative Alliance with Earth as a founding member and equal partner. The coalition's hierarchical structure was replaced with a council system where each species had equal representation regardless of technological advancement. More importantly, the new alliance incorporated human military doctrine and adaptive thinking into its defensive strategies. Fleet Admiral Ko Sun-hee stood once again on the bridge of the Indomitable, but now she looked out at a galaxy transformed. Human ships patrolled alongside vessels from dozens of species, all working together to explore new systems and establish peaceful contact with newly discovered civilizations. "Admiral," Captain Lee reported, "we have received a request for assistance from the Outer Rim colonies. They are reporting unusual energy readings that may indicate the presence of another advanced species." "Set course for the Outer Rim, Admiral," Ko ordered, "and send word to Dr. Vorthak that we may need his expertise in first contact protocols." The former coalition scientist had become OB,